Sing that chorus one more time. Oh my God, He will not delay, my refuge and strength always. I will not fear, His promise is true. My God will come through always. Always. As we play this song, I can't help but think about John Richardson, who is moving away this week, and he's going to be no longer able to attend our church, but he'll be sorely missed. And I know that God will absolutely give him all the strength he needs in this transition, because moving is such a stressful time for people. It's an amazing thing to know that he will always be there.
Close to your side, so heaven is real and death is a lie. I want to hear voices of angels above, singing as one. Hallelujah, holy, holy God Almighty, great I am, who is worthy, none beside thee, God Almighty, great I am. I wanna be near to your heart, loving the world, hating the dark. I wanna see dry bones living again, singing as one. Hallelujah, holy, holy God Almighty, great I am, who is worthy, none beside thee, God Almighty, great I am. Hallelujah, holy, holy God Almighty, great I am, who is worthy, none beside thee, God Almighty, great I am. The mountains shake before you, the demons run and flee. At the mention of your name, King of majesty, there is no power in hell or any who can stand before the power and the presence of the great I am, 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 the great I am. Hallelujah. mountains shake before you, the demons run and flee. At the mention of your name, King of majesty, there is no power in hell for any who can stand before the power and the presence of great I am, the 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 great I am. Hallelujah, holy, holy, God Almighty, the great I am, who is worthy, none beside thee, God Almighty, great I am.
I don't know you, but I know you well. You were with me when both of us fell. I hear you calling. All the tears that the two of us wept cannot wash away promises kept. I hear you calling. Hello, my beloved, I'm ready to reunite. How's darkness without you? So walk with me into the light. Lost for years in the dark of the wood, forgetting all that is precious and good. I hear you calling, tasting larger return from the war, loving peacetime as never before. I hear you calling, oh welcome, beloved, I'm ready to reunite. All's darkness without you, so walk with me into the light. Forgive me, beloved, I'm ready to make things right. I lost me, then found you, so walk with me into the light. Walk with me. Walk with me into the light. No more illusions. Farewell to hungry ghosts. Sing hallelujah. I'm with you, I'm with you, I'm with you. No more distractions. Farewell what I love most. Sing hallelujah. You're with me, you're with me, you're with me. In a fog of confusion and fear, only grace could have led me to here. I hear you calling, tasting lies, now I know it is true. I walk the road that'll lead me to you. I hear you calling, oh come now, beloved, I'm calling you out dust. Forgive me, beloved, I'm only beginning to trust. Hello, my beloved, I'm ready to reunite. All's darkness without you, so walk with me into the light. Walk with me into the light. God's just waiting for all of us, just an opportunity to call him out of the dust. He's waiting. He wants us to dust it off and get ready to have that relationship again. It's a beautiful thing. There is one unmistakable sign. In your eyes I can see the divine.
So, what brings you here today?
I mean, I guess you can see it, but I just walked in here. I mean, I feel like $1 million. 38 years. I mean, it's been 38 years since I've even felt just normal.
And what happened to make you feel this way?
I was laying on my mat by the pool and, hoping for my chance.
Your chance? At what?
I mean, I'm just sitting there. We're all sitting there, waiting. And sometimes the water starts to bubble and, I don't know, like people say that an angel does it. But the first person into the pool comes out healed.
Were you the first one in?
No, totally different. Totally better. Jesus came by. He walked right up to me. He saw me laying there, and he had to know why all of us were sitting there all day. But he asked, do you want to be made well?
Well, did you?
Of course I wanted to be made well. That's why I was there. And he said, stand, take up your mat, and walk.
Well, good morning, Forward Point. So good to be back up here with you. It was quite a fun day last night. The Doyle family was treated by a couple of different people to a couple of different things. Ashley, who's usually out there serving people and serving you popcorn, if you had popcorn this morning and getting kids checked in, she gave us a couple tickets to go to a Syracuse game, so we got to go to the Syracuse game last night. And these are like tickets that are pretty close, so you can see like right there where the action is, and you can actually read numbers on the back of jerseys. And it was just one of those fun experiences that we got to have, and it kind of started me thinking about their season, right? If you pay attention to any kind of sports, for me, it's only really college basketball, and it's really only Syracuse basketball that I care about. But when it's Syracuse basketball season, it's all mind, manner, attention, focus on deck for that. And my season started, and if you're like me, your season started with a tough loss to Virginia. How many people felt that loss? The first time I think we've had an 0-1 start in quite some time, right? Because it's very unlikely that you're going to face someone in conference, and let alone the defending champions, for your first game. Normally you play a lot of scrub teams, and we had our first loss. And then I'm watching the second game on TV, and the announcers are talking and doing what they do, kind of fill up dead time and space. And one of the guys asked the other guy, what do you think are the chances that the Syracuse team is going to make it to the tournament, right? And I'm thinking, what? This is only game 2 and you're already throwing out these desperation questions about Syracuse. Are they going to make the tournament? And the other guy was kind of reluctant and said, well, I think it's going to take a miracle to get this young team into the tournament this year. And I'm telling you, I just wanted to reach through the TV and strangle whatever this guy was that's talking, this stupid new ACC network thing that they're on, and these guys I've never heard of. I wanted to kill them, right? And here we are just enjoying the game. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just so excited to be here. And we were doing really well. We were beating up on the other team. And, win or lose, it didn't matter. We got to 70 points. So that means our tickets are worth free tacos at Taco Bell today and this week, right? I mean, come on. Let's give it up for some Syracuse Orange, right? The thought that it's going to take a miracle only a couple games in for our team to make it to the tournament, right? It would take a miracle. Have you ever thought about any other times that you've said that there's all these kind of sports analogies where it's the miracle play, right? I think it's the San Francisco 49ers. They got that throw into the touchdown, and it's forever been known now as the miracle catch, right? How easily we kind of throw around this word miracle. When you think about it, right, what is a miracle? Normally, it's this kind of thing that is unexplainable. You can't understand why it's happening or the results, the outcome of how it came to be. And we've kind of reduced it to this word that, man, it would take a miracle for the team to make it to the tournament. Or, man, it would take a miracle for me to be able to get up early after watching all my girls by myself all day, right? It would take a miracle. Well, we've been in the middle of this series called The Counselor, and what we've been doing is we've been using these questions that Jesus asked as kind of reflective questions for ourselves and our own faith. The reality is Jesus, when he was here on earth, he asked probably just as many questions as commandments that he gave. He constantly was using questions to kind of teach people and allow them to reflect about the inside of their hearts as they contemplated the answers to his questions. In the first week, we looked at the story of, Jesus is in the boat with his disciples, and they're in the middle of the storm, and it seems like, the perfect storm for them to just get wiped out and never heard from or seen from again. And his disciples say, Jesus, don't you care? Teacher, don't you care that we're about to go through this experience and we're about to die? And in the midst of this storm, Jesus kind of wakes up and yawns, just a little stretch from waking up, and he says, why are you so afraid? Why are you so afraid? And last week, Stephen showed us and talked about the story of these two blind guys who are coming and shouting, heal us, save us, teacher, master. And he asked them this question. He says, do you believe that I can do this? And then today we're going to look at this question that Jesus asks. He says, do you want to be well? Do you want to be well? And this is really coming out of, if you're here this morning, from any kind of perspective or story where you've been in some kind of long-term challenge, right? Maybe there's some kind of pain or some kind of issue that you've been going through, and it just seems like you've been going through it for not just days or weeks, but really months and even years. It could be some kind of health battle that you've been facing, and it seems like you take a couple steps forward and then it's a step or two, three back. Or it could be in the midst of some kind of financial turmoil where you say, where this is the year we get out of debt, and you start to plan, but then the unexpected bill comes, the repair comes, and it almost feels like you're now deeper into the hole than you were before. And the question is this morning, do we want to be well? The story comes from this passage where Jesus is going to be meeting with some people. There's this body of water, and it's right near what they call the sheep gate. Now, I don't know who kind of archaeologically designed this, but I would never put a pool by the sheep gate, okay? There's a good chance that there's some cross-contamination going on here, and at the very least, it's going to be smelly, right? But what would happen is there is this kind of tradition that whenever the water stirred up, right, and then they actually use the word bubbles, right? Whenever it bubbled, I don't know if it's because there was a sheep in the water that started to bubble, I don't know, but there was a stirring of the water, and the tradition was the first person to get into the water would be healed. Right, whatever their infirmity, whatever it is that they were going through, they would be healed. So when the waters stirred or bubbled, right, there's kind of this mad dash, this rush to be the first in. And Jesus kind of comes on the scene talking to this person, right? We start off, it says, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals, right? Jesus was there to party, okay? Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which again, I don't know why they did that, but in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie. These are the kind of people who were there, right? Looking to just get a chance at their healing. There were blind people, there were lame people, there were paralyzed people. And one of them had been there, an invalid, for 38 years. Can you imagine 38 years? I'm only 37, and the only thing that I can say that I've been doing for that long, right, is almost breathing. I've almost been alive for 38 years, but nothing else, really, right? And here's a man who's been dealing with this issue for 38 years. When I think about long-term, issues or pains, having gone through a couple years ago, there was a bunch of people that came over to our house afterwards on a Sunday, and it was over the summer, and we just were loving the beauty of the weather, and we did what we love to do. Stephen and I, we took on any kind of challengers in cornhole, right? He said, come one, come all, try to take on the undefeated champions up until just recently, where Ryan, unfortunately, is now the reigning champion, defeated us, but we will reclaim our championship. But that particular day, okay, Stephen and I were the reigning champions at cornhole. And we must have played, I don't know, felt like a million games over the course of the day, right? It was that intense, people trying to get our championship. And everybody left, and the next day, I kid you not, it almost felt like I could not use my left leg anymore, right? And you think about, man, what are the chances that you would get injured, okay, playing a game called cornhole, right? All you're doing is throwing a bag in the air, and I don't know if I just didn't have the right form or what, but I kid you not, the next day, and anybody who knew me back then will testify, I became like an invalid, right? I could barely move. I was like dragging this leg around. I had to go to the doctors to try to figure out what it was. They couldn't figure out what it was, so they sent me to a chiropractor, right? And then for the next series, the chiropractor couldn't really figure out, but all he wanted me to do was these stretches. I had to do this stretch on the floor where you go back like this for as long as you can and stretch your back. And literally my leg felt useless for it was months, right? And I had to explain to people why I was limping all the time. And I was, eventually trying to come up with some good story that I got it in Nam or something, but nobody would believe me. But it's because I was in some kind of crazy cornhole freak accident. Every day, getting into bed, and the pain was there, and I had to lift my leg up. Just wondering, even I kid you not, to this day, years later, sometimes I feel like a twinge in the same spot. I'm like, what is wrong with this leg from stupid cornhole, right? That's just a couple years, and it's gotten gradually better over time. Here's a man who's been dealing with this issue for 38 years strong. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, right? Here's one of his questions. Do you want to get well? I mean, this is kind of like asking, some guy who's down on his luck, hey, you want $100, right? Yeah, that would be great. Right? This is like asking a guy who's starving and hasn't really eaten much lately, hey, you want to come with me to the Golden Corral buffet, right? Yeah, sign me up, right? This is kind of like when my wife looks at me and says, hey, you want to go upstairs and go to bed early, right? Like, yes, let's go, come on, right? That's what's going on here. This is one of those doesn't really need a whole lot of insight for the answer to this question, right? But he says, sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool. When the water is stirred, and while I'm trying to get in, right, the idea, this invalid, whatever, he's trying to, I don't know if he's trying to hop or kind of roll in, and everyone else is kind of just running by him, and time and time again, he comes up short, and he says, I have no one to help me. While I'm trying to get in, someone else gets down there ahead of me. And then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And at once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. He walked, right? This is one of those miracle instances. Growing up for me, I would always hear about different kind of miracles, and it seemed to be one of those things where I just don't understand why God doesn't just heal everybody, right? If God just was blasting out healings right and left, everybody would be like, well, God must be real, right? And then going to church, I grew up in a charismatic church, and it seemed like every week there was this, after the pastor spoke, there was kind of this tradition where he would, have these words of knowledge, and he would say, right now, so-and-so or is being healed by this thing. If you're dealing with this issue, right now, God is doing the work. And And we would always hear that from the stage, but I never really saw the proof of that afterwards of people being healed. And you kind of tend to just maybe disregard it or sweep it under the rug, and we can't know all things. But how do we wrestle with this idea? If you're here this morning, how do you wrestle, right, with the fact that I've been going with this maybe for 38 years or for however long you've been here walking through this issue? God, where's my miracle? I have no one to help me get in the water. So what do we do when we're in this situation where this problem is persisting and we believe that God is a God who heals, but he hasn't given us our miracle for whatever reason? What do we do when the problem persists? Well, if you're taking notes, I encourage you to write these things down. If this is your story, the challenges when the problem persists, the first thing is the more discouraged you become. Right, the longer and longer this issue goes on and we deal with this pain, this burden, the story in our life, the more we're discouraged that we become. Right? And generally the kind of church thing is as soon as you're maybe open and vulnerable enough to share about it, the common response is, well, did you pray about it, right? Of course I pray about it. Get on my hands and knees all the time praying about it. This is my life 24/7. Yes, I've prayed about it. It's like we got to follow the directions. Did you pray enough? Did you pray hard enough? It could be maybe in your marriage. Your marriage seems to be falling apart and you did the things you were supposed to do. You got signed up for counseling and even your spouse wouldn't go, but you've been going and still it seems to just be falling apart. The longer it goes, the more discouraged we become. And it's weird. It's almost like we got to come to church now and be somebody we're not because we're in the midst of this story. And it doesn't match up with the joy and the peace and the happiness that everyone else is putting on, so we feel like we have to hide under this mask and we get discouraged. The second thing I see is a challenge is the more excuses that we then tend to make about this issue, right? Maybe it's an excuse to kind of hide our own doubts so nobody really knows, that we're not really sure because we feel like we've done all the right things, but we're still in this place without our miracle. So we maybe make excuses to try to help save God's reputation, right? Because our friends know that we love God and when we believe God does miracles, but he hasn't given us our miracle, and we begin to make excuses for God and why he hasn't done it for us. This guy here in the midst of the story, he begins to make this excuse, right? What's his excuse? He says, I got no one to help me get in the water. The water stirs and it starts to bubble and you try to anticipate it, but I can't be there all day just waiting. And then when it happens, it's like I just got up to go to the bathroom and then I get back in the water, I already got stirred and I missed out. I got no one to help me. I'm all alone. Just left here feeling helpless and hopeless in the midst of the situation. The challenges that we face, we make more excuses. And then lastly, this idea is then the more that we learn to just compensate without our miracle. All right, maybe you've seen what we would call a high-functioning alcoholic, right? Maybe you grew up with one, or you know a family, close friend who has a high-functioning alcoholic. It's the type of person, right, on the outside, they can go to work and they can get the job done. When they're out in social activities, they look like they got it all together, but at home, anybody who's close to them, that's nothing but fear. Because they're drinking and they're drunk and they don't know what they're doing and they say things and they do things. My youth group in Florida, I had one young girl who just always loved being at church. Man, she would, anytime, even if the doors weren't open, she'd just be walking around waiting for the next person to arrive so she could just be there. And on the outside, again, their family came to church every Sunday morning. You think they would all have it together, but he was a high-functioning alcoholic. And at home, he would say things and he would physically become violent. And he would begin to compensate, right? Overcompensate when he was out so nobody would know about it. And here's the reality. You will never, okay? You can never change until you recognize the problem. Whether it's you or it's somebody that you know, that they're never going to be able to change until they recognize, or I recognize, you know what, there's a problem here. And then in the midst of that, you're not going to be able to, or they're not going to be able to change what you're willing to tolerate. Right? If you're willing to tolerate this alcohol being in the house, then the reality is you're always going to be this high-functioning alcoholic. If you're willing to tolerate the computer without any kind of safeguards on it, then there's a good chance you're always going to find yourself dealing with pornography. Because the reality is, the question Jesus asked was, do you want to be well, right? Why would Jesus ask that? Of course. But Jesus knew something. You see, Jesus knew that you just can't help someone who needs help. It's obvious that this person, this invalid, needs help. The truth is that you can only help someone who wants help. You can only help somebody who wants help. What is one of the probably the biggest obstacle to faith? It's this fear, right? Fear of the unknown, doubt, the familiar. It takes us away from the familiar into this area of unknown. And for 38 years, right? For 38 years, I've been at this trying to get in, and I can't do it. So I've been able to kind of manage around it, set up a way for me to kind of form a living and get some food, maybe beg for some scrapes, and I compensate for it. I'll be able to manage around it. And then we start to accept that, you know, what it is, rather than believing in what God can do. This is just my reality. And as that begins to fill our mind and the course of our life, it pushes out the reality of what God can do in our lives. Or you don't understand this. This is just the way that things have always been for me. For 38 years, this has been my life. And until your desire becomes bigger than your disability, then you're not going to be able to find healing. Your desire has to become bigger than the disability, right? Do you want to be made well? Do you want to be whole? Because here's a truth. You may want to write this down, right? The question that Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Right? First, this is a sick guy, didn't even ask to be healed, right? He was just making a case for himself, and Jesus was like, all right, you know what? Get up, pick up your mat, and walk. He didn't have to ask to be healed. He didn't do anything to earn it or to deserve it. God didn't make him jump through some hoops or say, hey, you know, I need you to recite the Lord's Prayer. And this healing, it did not happen in the way that he thought he would. For 38 years, he just set himself up for, okay, I just got to be the first one to get in the water, right? When the water stirs and bubbles, I just got to be the first one. And that's the only way that God can take care of this. And it didn't come the way that he thought it would. Because when you pursue Jesus, regardless of the circumstance, he will heal things that you didn't even know were broken. He didn't even do anything to deserve it, right? The reality is he didn't heal the man because the man was good. The man was healed because Jesus is good. And the healing did not happen the way that they thought it would, right? It may not come through the water being stirred, or the finances are tighter than I'd like them to be. Or, you know, every day I drive around and I see these big lottery signs, right, up on 690 and 81 that show you how much the Powerball is. And I'm just, every time I see it, I'm thinking, man, you know what I could do with even the low amount? You know what I could just do with the 40 million? Right? That's how they get you. You get that mind, that thought in your mind of what could I do with 40 million? You know, a couple bucks is not that much to invest at a shot at $40 million. And every time I go to the mall, I got to look at that sign and I got to fight this battle because financially times are tough and we've got to repair things that we didn't know that we're going to have to repair, and we find ourselves back in some debt, right? And I'm thinking, man, what could I do? Of course, I'd give it all to the church except for a little bit for myself, right? God, if you let me win, that's what I would do, I promise. We try to plan, maybe that's how God wants to get me out of debt, right? God, is this you speaking to me? Healing is not coming through a lottery ticket. All right, because the truth is, Jesus in this moment, he says, I don't want to hear your excuses. I want to see your faith. I don't care what you can or you can't do or what others around you are enabling you or keeping you back from being able to do. I don't care about all that. Jesus says, I will do for you what only I can do, but I need you to do what only you can do in this. And you're going to have to get up and get your mat and walk. Do you have enough faith to step away from the familiar? Do you have enough faith to step away from the excuses you've been making for 38 years that you don't have anybody to help you? This last week in our life group, we talked about the difference between hope and faith, right? Hope is just kind of this desire. I hope it happens. He had hope that someday he would be the first one in the water. But Jesus was saying, do you have the faith? Do you have the action to be able to believe that I can do this in your life, even though it's not the way you expected it, even though you weren't able to earn it? Do you have the action to see it happen in your life? The familiar for us can be one of the greatest hindrances for our faith. And today there's an invitation to a call to really step away and to step into faith. And it could be, from a problem that you gave up on a long time ago and just reluctantly said, this is just going to be the way that it's always going to be for me. My leg is always going to be this weird invalid thing from an old cornhole war wound. It's just the way things are going to be. And maybe it's a call to step into, maybe it is time to get myself into rehab. To put a little faith, a little action into what I believe God is calling me to do. Maybe it's calling up this week and saying, we need some counseling, or I need some counseling this week, and I'm going to step out of the familiar and into the unknown. Maybe you say, I need to get myself in a financial planning course. I need to find a Dave Ramsey, class somewhere and start to live by this new rule. I'm not just going to spend based on what I feel in the whim, but on a system that's going to be designed to help me get out of debt and to live in financial freedom. Do you want to be well? Because what we see from the story is the truth is a moment with Jesus changes everything. This one moment, he wasn't expecting it. He's making excuses. There's no one to help me. Will you, sir, help me be the one to get in the water? But a moment with Jesus changes everything. Because God isn't just going to help someone who needs help. He's going to help that person who wants help. And then chooses to step out of the comfort, out of the known, out of the way it's always been, and into faith. For my life, I think about how I was caught up in this addiction of pornography. That really the earliest moments that I can remember as a young person in my single digits, I was out with some friends. It was my older sister and a bunch of people, and I don't really remember much about the event other than we were out in the woods and there was this abandoned house and we were kind of searching through it, right? Kind of on this adventure, and everybody was going through different places, and I remember coming across this magazine that was on the ground, and I picked it up and just kind of curiously looking through it, and it wound up being a magazine of naked women. And I don't know if that was the cause that sent the rest of my life into this addiction that I would struggle with. But for years, right? Years of my life. And they've done studies about how, when you expose yourself to pornographic material, there's really a remapping of your brain that begins to happen. It changes the way that you think. It changes the way that you interact with people, and specifically the women in your life, and even more so your spouse. And for years, I allowed this addiction to go unnoticed by anyone else, and I allowed it to warp my mind. And I tell you, I spent years, I grew up in the church. I spent years on my knees praying, God, would you heal me? Would you do a miracle in my life? Because I heard about the stories, right, where the alcoholic prayed, and in a moment, no more did they even have a desire for a taste of it. And I would say, well, if God can do it for them, then why can't he do it for me? God, would you do it for me? And it didn't happen. Anytime there was an altar call to go forward, if you wanted healing for something, I would go forward. And it would never happen. God, would you just heal me? God, would you just bring someone in my life to help me into the water? I've got no one. And what do you do when you find yourself, whatever it is, physical, addiction, financial? There's a moment where you need to step out of the familiar, and you got to do something that's going to break the cycle in your life. Because the truth is, a moment with God changes everything. And in the midst of this addiction, can I tell you, there were moments in my life where I don't know why, I don't know what the formula was, why it happened, but there were times where God would just come and his presence would be so strong, I would just be crying, because I know despite the addiction, despite the story, I felt his presence many times in ways that I can never really even express to you, other than it just brought me to my knees in emotion and crying. Because the story that God was trying to tell me and was trying to bring me through was not that my identity was found in this addiction, but my identity, maybe for you, your disease, it's not your identity. It has to be in Jesus. In a moment with Jesus, when you least expect it, in a manner you weren't expecting it at all, can change everything. And we're going to pray in a minute, and my faith is I'm going to believe and pray for people that today, this morning, there would be healings, things that happen in a moment. But even more than that, it's that we would all choose to step out of the comfort of the familiar and into an unknown where we have nothing to rely on but the presence and the person of Jesus Christ. And in that, you may wake up tomorrow in the same financial place or dealing with the same disease. But now you're doing it walking closer with Jesus than you were the day before. Because the reality is that is way more important than the hindrance you find yourself in. Right? Because God is going to begin to heal things in your life. Maybe you didn't even know that were there. The closer you get to him, he's just going to start to do things in your life. And you can't have a testimony without a test. And if you're in the middle of the test, don't allow the test to consume you and allow you just to make excuses and to fall back into the familiarity of this is just the way that it's always been. Because God wants to call you into a new relationship with him. Do you want to be well? It's so much bigger than the physical ailment. It's about your spirit being closer to Jesus. And this morning, he's calling us all to pick up our mat, to get up and pick up our mat and walk. Will you pray with me this morning? God, we thank you so much That despite the stories of our past, despite the years that have added up, dealing with the addiction or dealing with the infirmity, dealing with the attitude, that even here in the midst of wearing all sorts of masks and covering it up and making excuses, that in the midst of that, even now, we can feel your presence stirring something up inside of us to say, despite all of those other things, I love you. Despite the fact that in our minds we just have this one-track view that it has to be done this way, and if God doesn't do it this one way, then God must not be real. But God, this morning you want to start for us as a story that becomes so real to us, so unique just to us. We're going to look back and say, man, it's the only way it could have happened was because God did it. Not because of my perfect attendance at church, not because of my verses that I memorized, not because of anything else other than that moment of being in the presence of Jesus changes everything. So this morning, God, we have no small ask. This room represents story after story, probably more than not, that finds itself in this position of longing, this position of desperation, of hopelessness. So if you're here this morning and that represents you, there's an issue that's been going on in your life that just seems to be going on over and over again, and you almost have lost track of how long you've been dealing with it. This morning we're going to pray for moments of Jesus that would turn into more moments with Jesus, that would turn into more moments with Jesus. And this morning, God is, I'm believing, going to do the work in some people's lives. So if you're here this morning and you would say, God, I want to be real with what I'm going through. I know you know, but I kind of pretend you don't know and I pretend everyone else doesn't know. But this morning I want to be real. And this morning we're going to call and invite anyone who's been hiding in the dark to come out of the familiar and into the known. So if that's you, if that's your story, if you want to respond to that, I'm just going to ask you, it doesn't matter what anyone else is doing, if you just raise your hand and say, Jimmy, that's me. I want to step out of the known and into the unknown and into a moment with Jesus. I'm just going to ask you just to raise your hand and I'm just going to pray for you. God, you see every single story represented here this morning, a story that says, I've been doing it one way, expecting it to happen one way, blind to anything else around me, and here we are this morning in the presence of Jesus, and the call is to just get up and walk. So God, we're responding in faith. We're not just going to hope anymore, but God, we're going to respond in faith and follow that with action. And God, we pray that your Spirit would come down and be free to move and to do something supernatural here this morning. In each person and their vulnerability and their openness and their honesty, that would say, God, heal me in a moment now, or heal me as I begin to just each step grow closer and closer to you. But it starts with our mind this morning and our spirit that you're going to take and you're going to make new. And we're believing that for each person this morning, their spirit is being made new. So God, continue to do the work that only you can do in a way that only you can for each individual. God, that you would just free us from any kind of confidence we have in a thought pattern that says it's going to be done or has to be done this way. God, that you would just blow up our minds this morning to the reality of you're going to do something and you have begun something new in us this morning. God, I pray for an action plan for each person. God, as they begin to take that step to say, I need that to step out, that you would begin to place things in their heart and their mind that they need to begin to do after we say amen this morning. Maybe it's talking to a person, maybe it's asking for forgiveness, maybe it's confessing something that has been in secret. God, that our faith would lead us to action. And God, I pray that for each of us, we could be for each other just reflections of your grace and mercy and your love. That as we begin to hear the confessions of, this is where I was, but this is where God is leading me. God, that in our state of vulnerability and dependence upon you, that we can say like Paul, man, I prayed and I prayed for God to do one thing, to remove this thorn in my flesh. And he didn't do it. Like God said, I asked God, why? And God said, because in the midst of that thorn in your flesh, all that you need to worry about is, you know what, my grace is sufficient for you. And I'm going to be with you. And a moment with me is going to change everything. It may not be that it changes the thorn, but we're going to go and we're going to change some hearts of guards in prisons. We're going to go and I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak to the most powerful person in the world and the emperor of Rome. You're going to be able to do things you never thought you believed or imagined you could do, because the moment with me changes everything. Maybe not what you wanted it to change, but it's going to change everything. So God, have your way in us and in our hearts this morning. Thank you for allowing this question to do a deep work in our hearts. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen. I would encourage you this morning, church, if there's something specific that you would like to talk about, to pray about, we're going to be up here and we would love the opportunity to do that with you. If you can join us in helping turn this place into a winter Christmas wonderland and enjoy some pizza with us, we'd love to spend some family time together doing that, hang out for a bit. We'd love to have you do that. All right. God bless you guys. We'll see you next week as we wrap things up.